Today, we're diving into a really fascinating series from a ministry called TestifyPod. It's called The Original Testimonies, and it puts forward this pretty bold idea that the most powerful stories in our lives, well, they aren't actually original at all. They're echoes of an ancient divine blueprint.
Your story, His glory. This is TestifyPod's tagline, and honestly, it's the key to understanding everything they do. It hints at this incredible connection between our own personal lives and a much, much bigger story. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
So, this really gets you thinking, right? Are the biggest moments of our lives, the struggles, the breakthroughs, the massive changes, are they just random? Or could they actually be following a pattern that was laid out in the Bible thousands of years ago? This series, it tries to answer that very question.
So let's get into the first part of this, the idea of a blueprint for our testimony and the ministry behind it, TestifyPod.
So what exactly is TestifyPod? Well, they're a Christian media ministry, and they are all about personal stories, testimonies. But here's their unique spin. They believe our modern stories of change and redemption feel so powerful because they're not new. They're actually tapping into these ancient patterns we see in the Bible. And this series, The Original Testimonies, is where they lay out that whole foundation.
And this is their central metaphor, the divine blueprint. The idea is that our most meaningful stories are not just random events. They're following a specific pattern, a design, that God laid out in Scripture. And this is key. All of these patterns ultimately point to one person, Jesus Christ. So, let's look at the two main patterns they identify in this blueprint.
First up, we have what the series calls Stories Forged in Fire. This is all about finding redemption and purpose, not by avoiding suffering, but by going right through it. It's a really powerful and, let's be honest, a pretty counterintuitive idea.
And this section really tackles that universal, gut-wrenching question, where is God when I'm in pain? In a part of the series they call From the Furnace, they offer a way to look at this, not with simple, easy answers, but by showing us a recurring story, a pattern.
So the series points out this three-step progression in these furnace stories. First, the fire ignites. A terrible trial kicks off, and a lot of the time it feels completely unfair. Then you have the refining process. Right there in the middle of the pain, that's where God's presence is felt and character is forged. And finally, the restoration. God doesn't just end the trial, He brings the person out with a totally new and often bigger purpose.
And the Bible is just filled with these stories. You look at Joseph, portrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, all of it leading to him saving entire nations from starvation. Or Moses, who goes from prince to a fugitive shepherd for 40 years, humbled in the desert just so he could become the liberator of his people. Then there's Hannah, whose private agony over being barren leads to her giving birth to a prophet who would anoint kings. David is anointed king, then spends years hiding in caves, learning to trust God before he ever sat on the throne. And even Peter, his epic failure of denying Christ becomes the very thing that allows him to lead the early church with grace and compassion. Every single one of them was forged in fire for a purpose.
So the huge takeaway from this first pattern is incredibly powerful. In this framework, your pain isn't meaningless. It can actually have a redemptive purpose.
Okay, so on to the second major pattern, radical, unlikely transformations. This one isn't about enduring suffering. It's about being redeemed from a broken, messed up, or even hostile past.
And the core message here is just pure hope. It's that no one, and I mean no one, is too far gone for the grace of God. This part of the series, called The Unlikely Convert, is all about how your history doesn't have to define your destiny.
And just like the furnace stories, there's a clear three-step structure here. First, you've got the before picture, someone who is either totally against God or just couldn't be more distant. Then, the divine encounter, that one moment, that crisis, that supernatural intervention that changes everything. And finally, the after impact, a complete 180 in their life with a brand new mission.
And again, the series pulls out these classic biblical examples. Abraham came from a family of idol worshippers, and he gets called to become the father of faith for billions. Rahab, a prostitute in a doomed city, takes a huge risk and ends up in the direct family line of Jesus. You've got Ruth, a foreign widow with zero prospects, who shows loyalty and becomes the great-grandmother of Israel's greatest king. The Samaritan woman, a social outcast, has one conversation with Jesus and becomes the first missionary to her entire town. And of course, Paul, who was violently trying to destroy the church, has that blinding encounter and becomes its greatest champion. These are all stories of a complete and total turnaround.
This quote just nails the takeaway from this second pattern, right? Your past doesn't get the final say. But now, the series argues that these two patterns, the furnace and the convert, they don't just exist side by side. They actually come together.
And this is where the series really hits its climax. In its final part, the greatest testimony, it argues that these two patterns of redemption, suffering and conversion, aren't separate threads. No, they converge in one single person.
And here it is, the central thesis of the whole series. Jesus isn't just one more example of these patterns. He is the origin of the patterns. He is the testimony.
The series makes a really important distinction here. In our lives, we tend to experience one of these paths, right? We go through the furnace, or we have this radical conversion. But the argument is that Jesus' life is totally unique because he embodies and fulfills both of these patterns perfectly at the exact same time. He's not an echo of the story. He's the source of the sound. So first, they apply the from the furnace pattern to Jesus. The incarnation, God becoming human, is presented as the ultimate act of stepping into the fire of our world. He chose to experience hunger, betrayal, sorrow, and incredible pain. He literally became Emmanuel, which means God with us in our suffering. Then they connect Jesus to the unlikely convert pattern, and this is just mind-blowing. The cross is framed as the ultimate conversion story, what they call the Great Exchange. The only sinless person ever was, in a sense, converted into sin for us. The guilty were swapped for the righteous. And then, in the resurrection, death itself was converted into life. You just can't get a more radical turnaround than that.
And this is how they bring that huge theological idea right back to us. The logic is staggering. If God could take the worst event in human history, the execution of his son, and turn it into the source of all salvation, then there is absolutely nothing in your life, no pain, no mistake, no failure, that is beyond his power to redeem. So, what now? Where do we go from here? Well, the series doesn't just end with a history lesson. It wraps up by turning the camera, so to speak, from the ancient story right onto you. And the final point is this. This divine blueprint, this incredible story of redemption, it didn't end 2,000 years ago. It was actually designed to continue through the lives of people just like us. The series points to this command from the book of Acts, "You will be my witnesses," as the exact moment the torch was passed. Now followers of Jesus are the ones tasked with being the living proof of this story, the living testimony to the world. Our lives become the evidence.
And we'll end with this final, really provocative thought that is the launchpad for TestifyPod's entire ministry. It reframes your whole life. You're not just a listener hearing about this story, you are an active character in it. The claim is that your life, whether it looks more like a from the furnace story or an unlikely convert story, is now a platform for God's ongoing testimony in the world. And that's an idea that gives real, ultimate meaning to every single one of our stories.